My roommate planned a wedding in our home without my consent. Her mom threatened my career, but I stood my ground and watched it all collapse. I'm Lena, a 28-year-old woman, and I've been living in a shared apartment with my roommate, Michelle, a 30-year-old woman, for the past 2 years. We're not particularly close friends, but we've always had a cordial relationship. I moved to the city for work after landing a job at a tech startup, leaving behind my small hometown and close-knit family. It was a big step for me, as I'd never lived more than an hour away from my parents before. When I first arrived, I was overwhelmed by the bustling city life and struggled to find affordable housing. That's when I came across Michelle's ad for a roommate. She seemed nice enough during our first meeting, and the apartment was in a great location, so I decided to take the plunge. Michelle and I quickly fell into a comfortable routine. We're both pretty busy with our careers. I'm often working late at the startup, while Michelle is a nurse who works long shifts at the local hospital. We don't hang out much, but we respect each other's space and occasionally share a meal or watch a show together when our schedules align. About 6 months ago, Michelle started dating Sean, a 32-year-old man. He's a physical therapist she met at the hospital. Sean's a nice guy, and I didn't mind when he started spending more time at our apartment. He'd often cook for Michelle, and sometimes there'd be leftovers for me, which was a nice gesture. Just last week, my roommate Michelle, along with her partner Sean, came to me with an announcement that caught me completely off guard, coupled with a request that struck me as utterly outlandish. They revealed that they were engaged, a shock in itself, as I had no inkling their relationship had reached such a serious stage. Their plan, however, went far beyond sharing this joyful news. They expressed their desire to host their wedding right here in our shared apartment. Initially, I assumed they meant a modest ceremony in the common areas, perhaps a small gathering of close friends and family, which I was perfectly willing to accommodate. After all, I wanted to support their happiness, even if Michelle and I weren't particularly close. But then came the bombshell that left me reeling. They weren't just asking for a few hours of space. They wanted me to completely vacate the apartment for an entire week. Their vision was to have exclusive use of the place for 3 days leading up to the wedding, to deck it out with decorations and handle all the preparations. Then, of course, there'd be the wedding day itself, followed by an additional 3 days afterward for what they described as a mini honeymoon and to tidy up the inevitable mess. They even had the audacity to frame this as an opportunity for me, suggesting I could treat it as a chance to take a vacation. The sheer nerve of it floored me. This wasn't just about lending a corner of our shared space. They were essentially asking me to uproot my life for their convenience. I couldn't wrap my head around the expectation that I'd abandon my home, where I pay half the rent and utilities, for such an extended period. My work at the tech startup is demanding, with critical deadlines looming, and the thought of disrupting my routine was unthinkable. Beyond the practicalities, it felt like a violation of my rights as a tenant. They seemed oblivious to the fact that this apartment is my sanctuary, my place of stability in a bustling city far from my family. Their casual suggestion that I could just go away for a week, as if it were a trivial matter, left me feeling dismissed and disrespected. It wasn't just about logistics, it was about the principle of being pushed out of my own space for their personal celebration. I was shocked and told them I couldn't just leave my home for a week. I explained that I had important deadlines coming up at work and couldn't afford to take time off. Plus, this is my home. I pay rent to live here, not to be kicked out at someone else's convenience. I offered to stay in my room during the wedding day and maybe one day before for preparations, but a whole week was too much. They argued that they needed the space and privacy and that my presence would be awkward for their guests. Michelle then brought up the time my sister Sarah had stayed with us for a weekend last year. Sarah had just gone through a tough breakup and needed a change of scenery. I had asked Michelle's permission beforehand, and Sarah had slept on our couch, not in Michelle's room. I didn't see how this was comparable to asking me to leave for a week. When I stood my ground, Michelle got upset and said I was being selfish. She reminded me of all the times she'd been quiet when I had late-night video calls with my team, which, to be fair, she had been patient about. She also mentioned that she never complained when my parents visited for a day, even though they tend to be a bit loud. Sean then suggested that they could pay for a hotel room for me for the week. I appreciated the offer, but still refused. It's not about the money. It's about being asked to leave my own home for such a long time. Plus, I have all my work equipment set up in my room, and I can't just relocate my entire home office for a week. The argument escalated, with Michelle accusing me of not understanding the importance of their special day because I'm single. This stung a bit, as I had recently gone through a breakup myself and was still feeling a bit raw about it. Sean even made a snide comment about how I wouldn't understand family events because I'm always working. This felt particularly unfair, as I've made efforts to maintain a work-life balance despite the demands of my job. I tried to explain that I'm happy for them and want to support their marriage, but I don't think it's fair to ask me to completely vacate for a week. I suggested that they could easily rent a venue for their wedding if they wanted complete privacy. There are plenty of beautiful spaces in our city that would be perfect for a small, intimate wedding. Michelle countered by saying that having the wedding at home would save them money, which they could put toward a bigger honeymoon. She also mentioned that her grandmother, who lives out of state and has mobility issues, would be more comfortable in a home setting than a formal venue. I understand their reasoning, but I still don't think it justifies asking me to leave my home for a week. I pay half the rent and utilities, and while I want to be supportive of their wedding, I have a right to live in the space I'm paying for. The atmosphere in the apartment has been tense since this argument. Michelle has been giving me the cold shoulder, slamming doors, and avoiding eye contact. I've overheard her complaining about me on the phone to her friends, calling me selfish and inconsiderate. Yesterday I came home to find Sean in our living room, which was unusual, as he normally only comes over when Michelle is home. He tried to persuade me again, saying that this wedding means everything to Michelle, and that I should be more understanding. He even hinted that if I agreed, they might consider letting me be a bridesmaid. I found this offer a bit insulting, as Michelle and I aren't close friends, and it felt like they were trying to bribe me. I'm starting to feel like I'm going crazy. Am I being unreasonable here? Should I just suck it up and leave for a week? Or am I right to stand my ground? I've always tried to be a good roommate. I keep to myself, I'm clean, I pay my rent on time. I feel like I'm being punished for not bending over backwards for someone else's event. I thought about reaching out to my parents for advice, but I know they'd just tell me to come home for the week. They've never really understood why I moved to the city in the first place, and would probably see this as an opportunity to try and convince me to move back. I'm at a loss for what to do. Part of me wants to stick to my guns, but another part wonders if I'm making too big a deal out of this. The idea of coming back to my apartment after it's been used for a wedding also makes me uncomfortable. What if something gets damaged? What if they rearrange my stuff? Am I the bad guy for refusing to leave my apartment for my roommate's wedding? How would you handle this situation? I opened it to find a woman in her mid-50s standing there, looking stern and determined. She introduced herself as Sandra, Michelle's mother, and asked to speak with me privately. Reluctantly, I invited her into my room for a chat, feeling a bit blindsided by this unexpected visit. Sandra started by telling me how disappointed she was in my lack of support for Michelle's big day. She explained that in their family, weddings are a huge deal, and everyone always pitches in to help. She shared stories of how, when she got married, her entire family spent weeks preparing their home for the ceremony. She even mentioned that Michelle's older sister had postponed a work trip to help with wedding preparations. Then Sandra proceeded to guilt-trip me, saying that Michelle had always been a good roommate, which is true but irrelevant in the situation, and that the least I could do was to accommodate her one request. She brought up how Michelle had been there for me during my recent breakup, which was a bit of an exaggeration. Michelle had offered a sympathetic ear once or twice, but we hadn't really discussed it in depth. I tried to explain my side, emphasizing that while I appreciated Michelle as a roommate, asking me to leave my home for a week was unreasonable. I mentioned my work commitments and the fact that I pay rent for this space, but Sandra wouldn't hear it. She kept interrupting me, dismissing my concerns as selfish and short-sighted. Then, to my shock, Sandra pulled out her checkbook and asked me how much it would take for me to leave for the week. I was stunned at this blatant attempt to buy me off. I firmly told her that it wasn't about the money, but about respect for my space and my right to live in the apartment I pay for. Sandra's tone then changed from persuasive to threatening. She implied that if I didn't cooperate, she would make sure Michelle didn't renew the lease with me when it came up for renewal in 3 months. She also hinted that she had connections in the city and could make things difficult for me at work. She mentioned knowing someone on the board of a company that often collaborates with my startup, suggesting she could influence my professional life. I was taken aback by her threats and asked her to leave. As she was leaving, she said, "You'll regret this, young lady. You don't know who you're dealing with." The whole encounter left me feeling shaken and violated. I couldn't believe that a grown woman would resort to such tactics over a wedding venue. After Sandra left, I immediately called my landlord to explain the situation. I was worried that Sandra might try to influence him somehow. Thankfully, he was sympathetic and assured me that as long as I paid my rent on time, my tenancy was secure. He also advised me to document any further threats or harassment, just in case. I then sent a text to Michelle, explaining what had happened with her mother and how uncomfortable and threatened I felt. To my surprise, Michelle replied almost immediately, apologizing profusely for her mother's behavior. She said she had no idea her mother would do something like this and that she was embarrassed. Michelle came home that evening and we had a long talk. She admitted that she had gotten carried away with the wedding plans and realized how unreasonable their request had been. She explained that she had been feeling pressured by her family to have a perfect wedding, and that's why she had latched onto the idea of having it at our apartment. She and Sean had decided to look for an actual wedding venue instead. During our conversation, Michelle opened up about some family dynamics I hadn't been aware of. Apparently, her older sister had had a lavish wedding a few years ago, and Michelle felt pressure to live up to that standard. She also mentioned that her parents had been hinting about wanting grandchildren, which added to the stress of planning this wedding. While I appreciated Michelle's apology and explanation, I'm still shaken by Sandra's visit and threats. I'm considering installing a security camera at our front door, just in case. The whole situation has made me realize that I need to start looking for a new place to live once the lease is up. I've also decided to give my boss at the startup a heads up about the situation, just in case Sandra does try to follow through on her threats. My boss was understanding and assured me that my position is secure. This whole experience has been eye-opening for me. I've always tried to be accommodating and avoid conflict, but this situation has shown me the importance of standing up for myself and setting clear boundaries. After the incident with Sandra, things seemed to calm down. Michelle and Sean found a small event space for their wedding, and the planning seemed to be going smoothly. Michelle and I were cordial, but our relationship was understandably strained. We mostly kept to ourselves, only exchanging brief pleasantries when we crossed paths in the apartment. Last week, I came home from work to find Michelle in tears in our living room. It was unusual to see her so upset, as she usually maintains a calm demeanor, even during stressful hospital shifts. When I asked what was wrong, she broke down and confessed that she and Sean had called off the wedding. Apparently, they had been having some serious disagreements about their future, particularly about where to live and whether to have children. Michelle wanted to stay in the city and focus on her career for a few more years before starting a family, while Sean was keen on moving to the suburbs and trying for a baby soon after the wedding. The stress of wedding planning had brought these issues to the surface, and they realized they weren't on the same page about major life decisions. Michelle said that the more they tried to plan their future together, the more they realized how different their visions were. I felt terrible for Michelle, despite our recent conflicts. I awkwardly offered her some tea and listened as she poured her heart out. She admitted that she had gotten caught up in the excitement of planning a wedding and had lost sight of what was really important in a relationship. Michelle shared that she and Sean had been dating for less than a year when he proposed. She said yes in the heat of the moment, caught in the romance of it all. But as they started planning the wedding and discussing their future, she realized how little they had actually talked about their long-term goals and values. Then Michelle surprised me by apologizing again for the whole apartment wedding fiasco. She said that, looking back, she couldn't believe how inconsiderate she had been. She even showed me some texts from her mother, Sandra, where Sandra was pushing her to have the wedding at our apartment because it would be more cost-effective and intimate. Michelle said she now realized how much pressure she had been under from her family and how that had clouded her judgment. She admitted that she had always struggled to stand up to her mother and that this situation had been a wake-up call for her to set better boundaries with her family. We talked for hours that night, and I saw a side of Michelle I had never seen before. She opened up about her insecurities, her family's expectations, and her fears about the future. It was the most honest conversation we'd had in the 2 years we'd lived together. The next day, I came home to find a gift basket on my bed with a heartfelt note from Michelle. She thanked me for standing my ground and said that my refusal to leave had actually been a wake-up call for her to reevaluate her relationships and priorities. The basket contained some of my favorite snacks and a gift card to my favorite local coffee shop. While I appreciate Michelle's gestures and our newfound understanding, I'm still planning to move out when our lease is up in 2 months. This whole experience has shown me the importance of having my own space and setting clear boundaries. I've started looking at studio apartments in the area, excited about the prospect of having a place all to myself. In an ironic twist, Sean reached out to me yesterday, asking if I knew of any available rooms for rent. Apparently, he and Michelle had been planning to move in together after the wedding, and now he needs to find a new place quickly. I politely told him I didn't know of any openings, but wished him luck in his search. It felt a bit awkward, given everything that had happened, but I tried to be civil. This whole situation has made me reflect on my own life and relationships. I realize that I've been so focused on my career that I haven't given much thought to my long-term personal goals. It's been a reminder that it's important to have those difficult conversations early in a relationship, rather than waiting until you're planning a wedding. In the weeks following Michelle's breakup with Sean, our living situation actually improved somewhat. Michelle seemed genuinely remorseful about how she had treated me, and she made efforts to be a better roommate. We even had a few movie nights together, which was nice. It was strange how the absence of wedding stress changed our dynamic. However, I still felt that it was best for me to find my own place. I spent the last 2 months of our lease looking for apartments and finally found a small studio that I love. It's a bit more expensive than my share of the old apartment, but the peace of mind is worth it. The day I moved out was bittersweet. Michelle helped me pack and even enlisted some of her friends to help with the heavy lifting. As we were sorting through things in the common areas, we found ourselves reminiscing about the past 2 years. Despite our recent conflicts, we had shared some good times too. As we were saying goodbye, Michelle thanked me again for standing my ground during the wedding debacle. She said it had made her realize how much she had been letting others, especially her mother, influence her decisions. She mentioned that she had started seeing a therapist to work on setting boundaries and figuring out what she really wants in life. Speaking of Sandra, I haven't heard from her since that threatening encounter. Michelle assured me that she had a serious talk with her mother about boundaries and that Sandra wouldn't be bothering me again. Michelle even shared that she had told her mother she wouldn't be welcome in Michelle's life if she continued to meddle in her affairs or threaten her friends. It was good to hear that Michelle was taking steps to address the family dynamics that had contributed to our conflict. In an interesting turn of events, Michelle decided not to renew the lease on our old apartment either. She told me she's moving back to her hometown for a while to figure things out. She mentioned something about possibly going back to school for a master's degree in nursing, which she had put on hold when she met Sean. It seemed like the whole wedding fiasco had prompted her to reevaluate her life goals. As for Sean, I heard through the grapevine that he ended up moving in with a college buddy. Apparently, he's also doing some soul-searching after the breakup. Michelle mentioned that they had a few conversations post-breakup and realized how different their life goals were. It was a reminder that sometimes relationships end for valid reasons, and it's better to recognize that before making a lifelong commitment. Looking back on this whole experience, I'm glad I stood my ground. It wasn't easy, and there were moments when I second-guessed myself, but I know I did the right thing. I've learned a lot about the importance of setting boundaries and not letting others take advantage of my kindness. My new apartment feels like a fresh start. I've already had a small housewarming party with some work friends, and it feels great to have a space that's entirely my own. I've set up a proper home office area, which has been great for my productivity. I've even started exploring some new hobbies, like indoor gardening and painting, now that I have full control over my living space. This experience has also made me think about my own future. While I'm happy being single right now, I've started to consider what I want in a long-term relationship and what my goals are for the next few years. I'm grateful for the perspective this situation has given me. Michelle and I have tentatively agreed to meet for coffee in a few weeks. While we're not close friends, we both felt it would be nice to catch up without the stress of being roommates. I'm curious to see how she's doing and what direction her life is taking. As for my career, things are going well at the startup. My boss was impressed with how I handled the potential threat from Sandra, and it's opened up some conversations about taking on more responsibility at work. I feel like I've grown not just personally but professionally through this experience. It's been a wild ride, but I'm ending it in a much better place than where I started. I've learned valuable lessons about standing up for myself, the importance of clear communication, and how to navigate difficult interpersonal situations. While I hope I never have to deal with a situation like this again, I feel better equipped to handle conflicts and set boundaries in the future. Here's to new beginnings and the peace that comes with having a space to call my own.